Hello, this is Mike Van Meter. Welcome to the Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily podcast. We want to thank you for joining us. You can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. This podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support for those suffering from addiction. Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and I'm here with Lily, and this is the Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily podcast. And tonight we are going to get right into it and discuss our favorite topic, which is the deception of denial. Denial is a big thing in recovery. You know, and it's not by accident. We often talk about how addiction is a disease of the mind and the body. And in the last couple of episodes, we've talked about the body. We've talked about how the body just screams for drugs and alcohol because you become physiologically dependent on it. We went through how you've depleted vitamins and minerals. The neural pathways have changed. And you need about a year to a year and a half. And if you're really not taking care of yourself, up to about 2 years for all of that to correct itself. But tonight, we're going to talk about the mind part of it. One of the unique characteristics of the disease of addiction is that it's the only disease that we know of that tells you that you don't have it. It tells you that you don't have it. After all, if you have experienced addiction yourself, or if you know somebody that's experiencing addiction, you've run into that. You will hear things like, I don't drink that much. I'm a functional alcoholic. That's my personal favorite. Have you guys heard that before? I am a functional alcoholic, and I love that. And I always say, functional in whose opinion? Your opinion? I bet if we brought your family in here and talked to your spouse or your children, we're going to get a very, very different take on how functional you actually are. And unfortunately for many of us, when you ask people, why is it, or how did you come to the conclusion that you are functional? They'll say, because I still have my job. And that's not a good standard, because chances are you may be holding on to that job, but it may not be going as well as you think it is. I bet if we brought your employer in and your coworkers, we'd get a different story from them. But the question is really, but how's the rest of your life going? The relationship with your spouse, the relationship with your kids. What kind of hobbies do you have? You know, in recovery, we talk about the used tos. I used to do this. I used to do that. I used to play the guitar. I used to play sports. I used to watch sports. I used to hang out with friends. It's the used tos. I used to do that. So it's not as functional as you think. Now, for the loved ones, it's frustrating because, I mean, it's obviously an untruth, and you get upset with your loved one, but this isn't by accident. You know, I can tell you from personal experience, you actually believe that when you're telling people that. You really are in denial, but it's not on purpose. Now, the problem with addiction is the behavior itself is so untenable and so unsavory that people get upset and they become frustrated, and that's understandable. I can tell you, I work in the addiction business right now in a hospital, and when I see the same patient multiple times, after a while, there are times when I have to sit and remind myself of the very things that we're talking about right now, because it's easy to get frustrated. But it's important for you to understand this, and it's important for me to keep reminding myself that you're not dealing with a bad person necessarily. You're dealing with a sick person, and there is a difference. So in the last few episodes, and I do encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes, we focused on the physical part. Tonight, we're focusing on the mental part of that. And the topic is the deception of denial. So with that, I want to bring Lily onto the program, and welcome to the show, Lily.
Hey, Mike.
So go ahead and talk to us a little bit about, you're on the receiving end of this, or we're on the receiving end of this. I mean, you went through this with me, and you are a big Al-Anon person, and you do some lay counseling through the church. So you run into this a lot too. So what do you see? What do you see out there as far as denial is concerned?
You know, Mike, I was just thinking about that where, of course, we're looking at it looking back in time, but it was only when I came to Al-Anon that I heard the word functional alcoholic. And so I think that there is a twofold in terms of how that relates. I think that the family members also can be trapped into the idea of a functional alcoholic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because the term, I had never heard of it other than the circles of in recovery about, oh, my husband's a functional alcoholic, but he just got a DUI and he's a functional alcoholic. So I don't understand how he was pulled over, why he has this issue. And so, I mean, even I had semblances of denial because it's really just like it's unfathomable, that's a word, for you, for yourself, even the family members, especially when they love their loved one, there's an element of they get trapped just as well. And so now when I look back, is I'm thinking, wow, was that really functional? And like you said, in the eyes of whom versus dysfunctional, because you're not functional at all. And that's part of the denial.
Yeah, and it is frustrating. And you can see that with the family members as well. And I'll tell you, working with the patient or the sponsee, whatever your situation is, it's frustrating enough. But I'll tell you, a close second is working with family members. And I'm not talking about you per se, because we were in the midst of it. In the business that I'm in right now, when we talk to parents and loved ones and spouses about what needs to be done, it's they've been so conditioned to really support their loved one in ways that are continually point the person back to their use. And it's difficult. And I'll tell you, with parents, when it comes to their children, if it's the child that has an addiction issue, it's almost impossible.
What are
really
examples, Mike, that you get?
Yeah, well, let me just kind of walk through a few of them. How about, let's say you have someone that is a spouse, so let's say a woman, for example, and she has multiple children. And she thinks in her mind that she is a responsible mom. She's a dedicated mom. In fact, she'll tell you that her top priority on planet Earth is her children, but yet she's drinking around the clock. And the fact is, her husband's at wit's end. The children really want nothing to do with her. In the example I'm using, let's say the children are teenagers. So they have, like most teenagers will have friends over. So then they stop having the friends over. They have all sorts of sporting functions, maybe band functions, school functions, graduations, things like that. And the fact is, they don't want their mom anywhere near them. Okay, so the question is, what's going on? Mom's been through treatment many, many times, but yet they still stick around and they don't do the things that they need to do. Now, I think that's a tough situation, is it not? Because you got kids, you got a husband, you have a home, you have a woman that no doubt cares about her children. There's no doubt about that. But what do you do? In fact, I'll put that back on you. What would you recommend? Because you've been in that situation. Like, what are the types of things that can be done, or the things that you see are done, and then contrast that with what you would recommend that someone do? Now, let's say these are two people that love each other. They don't want to split up, but yet this behavior goes on and on and on. Let me throw another caveat in there. This person does not believe that they can go through life without not drinking anymore. They do not believe that they can. This person loves their children, loves their family, but loves alcohol as well. So this is difficult. So I know you've seen this quite a bit. So kind of run us through that.
So I'm trying to wrap my arms around, Michael, from whose perspective? Am I from the family member's perspective, because I'm not an alcoholic, so I can't speak on the behalf of the alcoholic.
Yeah, I would say from the family member's perspective, because in this particular scenario that I'm giving you, let's say this family member really doesn't even envision themselves getting sober. I'm not even really sure that they're at the point where they've surrendered to the point where they have a problem. So now you're the spouse, okay? In this case, a husband, but you can put yourself in their shoes. But the husband is at his wit's end. This is not going to go anywhere. I can put my wife in treatment 20 more times, and it's not going to matter because this person does not want to get well. Remember, if you don't want to get well, you're not going to get well. And it does not matter how many times you go to treatment or where you go to treatment.
So I would say from the perspective of the family member, there's really nothing you can do, Mike. If the individual who is the alcoholic or the addict and they themselves are in denial, and that's our topic tonight, there is nothing that there are ways that you can try to finagle and try to create that bottom, which I did for you so many times, to try to convince you that to erase the denial that you were under. But everything I tried just simply didn't work. But I can say a few things on top of that. When I was mentioning earlier that sometimes the family members themselves are in denial, I think that early on, you would say, "Hey, I'm not that bad." And because I loved you, I thought, "Oh yeah, you're not that bad." You know what I mean? And so I myself would either enable your behavior or downplay it, how bad it was. But then when it's staring us in the face and other people are starting to notice that you've got a problem, then I had to face the reality, oh yeah, you do have a problem. And then, so of course, my recognition that for me to be in denial that you weren't an alcoholic, that came a lot quicker than you did, right? Because it was only until you faced it, after I tried everything under the sun that I could possibly come up with in order to get you to go into recovery, it turned out to be something else or someone else or some other circumstance that caused you. And that's what I'd be interested in as a family member is I don't know if you remember, but I did try many different ways to get you to kind of shake off your denial. And,
I remember.
but then I still, just like I'll tell some of my friends, my Al-Anon friends, I'll be like, you know what? I thought that I would be the one to let you see the light, and it wasn't me. And something else brought you, I don't know if it was work or I'd be curious to see, I'm sure it was a combination of many different things that finally broke your denial, self-denial. But from the perspective, going back now to the perspective of the family members, it was only when I actually accepted the fact that you had a disease, and when I, they always say acceptance is the answer. When I stopped trying to intentionally manipulate you in order to make you get help, when I started just focusing on myself, going to meetings, getting the support that I needed from family and friends, that's when I got better. And I don't know whether or not by me getting better and not giving you an excuse that it was my fault, then you were able to look in the mirror and say, it's not her fault anymore. It's really me. So, those are the things that I remember that were going on.
Yeah, I think what's important to understand is pressure has to be applied, but it can't be a false pressure. And what I mean by that is that it's important to not create a false bottom. Does that make sense? It is not up to the family member to create situations where the person that is still using will be forced into. I think what has to happen is that it has to happen naturally, because it will happen, right? Now, let me just back up a minute and kind of, I'm going to come back to this example, but I want to demonstrate an observation that I made in my training to become a counselor. So I was working. I was an intern and a resident at a treatment facility, and in this particular treatment facility, they had a contract with the FAA. Now, that's important because we had pilots, flight crew, mechanics, flight people that are heavily monitored by the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. So what happens with the FAA, it's very, very strict. It's strict this way in the military, too, for people that fly. And if you have an alcohol-related incident, and I don't mean just flying. I mean, if you get a DUI or there's domestic that involves alcohol or you get arrested for being drunk in public, you're actually grounded. You're not allowed to fly. And what the FAA does is they say, you will go to treatment. And it will be a 28-day treatment facility. And then after that, you're going to do intensive outpatients. You're going to do, and they have all these requirements. And you're going to have to go to so many meetings per week. And you're going to have to see a therapist. All these very stringent requirements. And then, of course, you're being tested for your use. And it goes on for a while. It goes on, I want to believe, say it's been 2 years that you're in this. And what they do is they hold your FAA license and they say, okay, if you want to fly ever again, you will do this. You will do this or you're never going to fly again. So what's important there is most pilots, and I was a military pilot myself, so I'm very familiar with that world. Most people that are pilots wanted to be a pilot since they were like 5 years old. Okay, so this is a life ambition. This is not just a job. It is really what they wanted to do their whole lives. So now they've had this alcohol-related incident, and the FAA says, hey, you know that thing that you've wanted to do your entire life? If you ever want to do it again, here's what you're going to do. Well, when you look at the results of that, believe it or not, they've done studies of people that are in that program. And by the way, if you want, for those that are curious about this type of program, I had an individual come on to this particular podcast early on, I want to say in the first year that I did this podcast, and talk about what's called the HIMSS program, which is the HIMSS program is the FAA's program for pilots in order to come back into flying again. And that individual goes into great detail as to how this worked. Now, how it relates to this particular podcast is they've done studies of people post-program. Remember, I told you 2 years, and then after 2 years, you're off the program. They have found, Lily, that over 95% of the people that are in that program stay sober beyond those 2 years. Now, the reason why that's important is because there really is no other sample group that you can say that about. In any other program, any other traditional 28-day program or any other program that you can think of, the long-term success rate is actually quite small, but yet pilots have a very high degree of success. Now, how does that apply to the conversation tonight? I think what has to happen is that there has to be consequences for the things that you love. But they have to be natural consequences. It can't be forced. So like in the scenario that I gave, family and children. Okay, very important to this individual in this scenario. Now, could the argument be made, and you'd be better equipped to answer this than I, Lily, but could the argument be made that if a mother is in that type of a situation, in that state, is that considered abuse? Is it considered abandonment? Is it considered destructive? Because if you have children in a home and you have a mom that is drinking around the clock, and anytime she does show up at a school event or a party or a function for the kids, she's at risk. It's embarrassing for the kids. It's damaging to the kids. The question then is it more damaging to keep the mom in the home, or is it more damaging to keep the kids with the mother? And the reason why I mention that is, would it be appropriate to have the husband then say, look, you can keep drinking, you're going to do this, but we're not going to be with you, and you're not going to be a part of this family while you're doing this? Because as the father, I'm finding this is more destructive to the kids than helpful, and I have an obligation to these children. You're free to do whatever you want to do, but you're not free to do it here because I have a responsibility to the kids as well. Now, that might drive the mom into saying, okay, I am willing to do whatever I need to do to get sober, because that's really what it comes down to. A decision to get sober. You've made that decision, and then you have to be willing to do anything that it takes to get sober. Now, she may choose to not do that, or it may drive her into getting well. We don't know. None of us can have a magic wand and we can predict which direction this person's going to go. But we do know this, that addiction is primary, chronic, progressive, and deadly. It gets worse over a period of time, never better. There are no exceptions, and you will not be the first exception. So this woman, without some sort of energy that's going to push her in a different direction, she's going to get worse. We know that. There are no exceptions to that. So I think, and this is just me, I think that what the husband in this scenario would need to do is just say, okay, I'm going over here. We're moving on with our lives. We're going to do what we're going to do. We will help you in any way we can, but you've got to get your help. But we're not going to allow you to be here and create more destruction, because you know what's going to happen, Lily, is that when those kids are 40 years old and they're in therapy themselves, guess what the topic is going to be when they're 40 years old in the therapy? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that just hearing your scenario, it's very similar to what happened with us. Whether or not that made a difference in you, I don't know. I don't know if you recall, but there was a time where our son was playing travel hockey, and he had a tournament down in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so that's like a 6-hour drive from where we live. And he's in high school. And then, of course, our daughter's in elementary school. And so we had made plans that we were going to drive there together. And you had said, yeah, I'll drive, because you're the one that likes to drive long distances. So, but then the very next morning, you're like so drunk. But I ended up calling my counselor saying, hey, we're supposed to be going down. And he agreed to do this long-term trip. But so I did a couple of things. First I called your sponsor because I was desperate. And they said, Lily, when he's ready to get sober, have him give me a call. But don't have him call me when he's drunk. So that happened. And then I ended up calling my counselor, and she's like, he's essentially abandoned you. She said, is there any reason why you can't drive the 6 hours by yourself? I'm like, well, I guess I could. I mean, I could just take more breaks. And she's like, then do it. Now, of course, you were extremely upset with me because I left without you. But then it wasn't something that I made a false bottom. I'm like, hey, you promised. We have this tournament. We have to go. You decided to drink. And so the consequence is I'm going without you. So the kids and I packed up, and of course you're drunk, sleeping. So we packed everything up, and then we drove all the way to Raleigh, to the point where you kept calling. And then I had to call and tell the front desk, please do not let his calls come through. So the whole weekend I did not communicate with you. I could see your texts, but I'm like, I couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it. And then of course we had a conversation on the way back, and I think that you called your best friend. I mean, it's like that was the beginning turning point where I started just doing things without you. Whereas before it was like wishing, and then I actually literally put my life on hold for you. But that counselor helped me to see that I wasn't necessarily enabling you, but I was putting my life on hold because of you. And it was actually harming the children, because certainly you were still working, but then as soon as you came home, you were drunk. So you're really not available for me or the children.
Yeah, but that was not a false bottom. I mean, that was just something that you let play out.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
That was something that you just let play out. Now, but let's switch it a little bit. And what about those that don't allow? Now, we're not talking about false bottoms, but those that prevent bottoms. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah, certainly. And I would say that I was guilty of some of that myself. Of course, remember, that's what I was saying, that I started letting, like you said, consequences be as they may, instead of covering for you or putting my life on hold, or, my husband's sick, or, just coming up with excuses. Because I'll always say in Al-Anon, just allow natural consequences to occur. But sometimes it's actually kind of hard to figure out whether or not, am I creating a bottom here? Is this a natural consequence? I think that that's what I'm saying. Sometimes the family members themselves get caught up in it because they have their loved one's intention well in mind, but then there's not a cookie cutter way to do all this. And I don't know, looking back in time, what things I would have done differently other than just doing things differently than what I had done before and not wondering whether or not it was going to affect you or not. I had to put the kids and my best interest in mind.
Yeah. So what are the things that, for those that are listening and they have a loved one that's kind of in the situation that you're in right now? Because I think what happened with you, the way that I saw it, and where there was sort of a turning point in me was you stopped forcing. There was a certain point where you just stopped forcing it. It doesn't mean you're not involved. It doesn't mean that you don't have opinions. But I think you went from creating a situation and creating almost like a funnel effect of trapping me into this will finally make him get sober. You stopped doing that because you have to be careful with that because it creates resentment and bitterness on the person. And that was happening with me. And resentments with an addict, that is the number one reason why people relapse is resentments. But it's a fine line, and I understand it's a fine line, but you're constantly pointing in the right direction. It's just matter of fact. It is, okay, you have decided to go drink yourself to death or drug yourself to death. I understand that. It's a free country. You can do whatever you want. You are free to do that. What you're not free to do is do that to me and the kids. So we are going in this direction, and here's what we're going to do. The kids have a function this weekend. I'm going to it. We will leave you behind. We are not waiting for you. We're not making excuses for you. It's just a matter of fact. That's what we're going to do. We're having a function on Friday. The kids have asked for you to not be there because it's embarrassing to them or it's risky to them. And I think that, in our particular case, that's what happened. Was it wasn't that you were fighting it. You stopped fighting me after a while. It was just, okay, got it. We're moving on. You've decided to do this and we're doing this over here because I have an obligation as a parent to do that. And I think that's important. And I think that if you're listening to this podcast and you have a loved one that continues to use and they're not getting well, I think that you really have to sit down at a certain point and do some soul searching and understand what are my responsibilities as a parent. Like in this scenario we're talking about with kids. What's my responsibility? What would you do? And I think one way to start with that is to ask yourself, if your loved one passed away, and that's can happen to any one of us, your loved one passes away, what would you do? How would you function at that point? Because effectively, your loved one that's using has kind of checked out. They might not be dead, but they're certainly not participating. So what is your plan B? And maybe go to that plan B. Does that make sense?
Yeah, excuse me. You made a very good point, Mike, because that is what it reminded me of. It was like you're still alive, but you're not an active participant in the family. So it's as if you were almost like the walking dead, if that's a word to use. Because like you said, you were checked out, but yet I still loved you. So it was like mourning. It was very sad. And I know that there's a lot of family members that are out there that when they have a loved one, especially when they're under denial or they want to keep drinking or keep drugging, there is a very deep sadness that is over the family members because they want their loved one to be well. And because the way the disease hijacks the mind of the alcoholic or addict, the family member, that's why the family member is just almost like walking around sometimes in shock. And so, yeah, it's very difficult. And so I know that we were talking about denial and we talked about a little bit, there may be some denial on the family member's part, but of course they are desperate to get their family member or their loved one who's the addict or alcoholic into treatment. So can you tell me a little bit more about the denial piece? Like why What is it about alcohol that causes that denial to be so prevalent?
Well, let me do sort of a quick physiological lesson. And I think it's important to understand how this works. Your body is designed to survive. Your body's an amazing thing. If you think about your body, everything about your body is designed to survive. You know, if it's hot, we sweat. If it's cold, we shiver. We're hungry, we eat. We have the sexual urge to propagate the human race so we don't go extinct. And your body also recognizes poisons. I mean, because if your body didn't recognize dangerous bacteria, any sorts of things that could enter your body, food poisoning, stuff like that, it has to recognize these things, because if it doesn't, then it could negatively impact your chances of survival. And much of that is, in the physiology, it's genetic. Genetics drive everything. Really, if you think about it, your skin color, your eye color, your hair color, if you're going prematurely gray, if you have a receding hairline. I mean, we understand that. We understand that certain types of cancers and diseases have a genetic predisposition. We inherently understand that with just about everything. Genetics drives everything. Genetics also drives addiction. We do know that there's a correlation between somebody that has addiction and it being in their family bloodline. Okay, so it's brought down. Now, where that comes into play is, again, your body's designed to survive. So if let's say you have, let's give an example of, let's say that you go to a restaurant and you get food poisoning. What happens? Your body says, ooh, this is not good. We ate some bad food. And the brain says, that's not good. That is threatening to us. So let's stop eating whatever that is, and let's purge it from both ends, throwing up and diarrhea. The diarrhea is the body's natural cleansing process, as is throwing up, because that's getting out whatever the poison is. Your body, your brain recognizing this is a poison. Again, survival mechanism. The problem is that with alcoholics, through that genetic mutation that we have, it's not out. First of all, alcohol is not processed the same way that it is in non-alcoholics. But second of all, instead of your brain saying, hey, this is a poison, because it is, alcohol is a poison to every cell of your body. It is a poison. It is a toxin. Your body should reject it. That's why people that are not alcoholic might have 2 or 3 drinks, and you say to yourself, oh, I don't like that. I'm getting tingly. I'm losing control. You don't like the feeling, right? It's the exact opposite with alcoholics, because you actually have this, there's a substance known as acetaldehyde, which is a heroin-like substance. It's a poison. It's a toxin, but it's kind of like heroin, and it gives you that euphoria, much like a heroin addict. But if you've ever met a heroin addict, they shoot up heroin and they're like, oh my God, this is euphoria. I love it. And you're always chasing that feeling. Well, that's the feeling that alcoholics get. And you start chasing that feeling. Now, what happens is your brain says, hey, not only is this not a poison, but it's something that's good for us and it's necessary for survival. That's the key difference right there. One, alcohol is processed differently, different feeling, and then your brain starts saying, we need that for survival. But anything that your body recognizes is necessary for survival, it's going to want more of, and it will protect it. And so part of that is our brain actually fools you into thinking this is necessary. Not just that it's good and it feels good, but it's necessary for survival. And it will protect that. And that's why when you see somebody that's detoxing off of alcohol, or they get to the point where they want to drink and they look like they're going to die if they don't drink, that's why. It's not actually make-believe land. Their brain is actually saying, hey, we need that or we're going to die.
You just reminded me of a story. I think it was a TikTok where there's a woman who, I can't remember her name, but it's called Lie to Survive.
Yeah.
So she tells you these ways, you're never alone. There's always someone at home. Oh, my boyfriend is coming. Those kind of things. But she's lying. She says it's okay to lie because you need it to survive. So the kind of...
If it's between life and death.
So you're saying from the denial starts because the alcoholic thinks that it cannot live without the alcohol?
Yeah, the brain's telling you that. Yep.
So that explains
So
what
it's
I
a
would
lie.
say.
Because actually the opposite is true. By you drinking, it's killing you, but you have it's almost like your on-off switch on a wall. You keep hitting it to on, you're like, but why are the lights going off? And then you put it off and the lights go on. Because it's miswired. That's what's going on in our brain.
So it's misfunctioning.
Right.
But what do you do in what about those process addiction type things like, there's prescription drugs. They're not necessarily poison, but what's happening in that person's mind to cause the denial?
Well, it's still what's inherited is really addiction. It's not necessarily just alcoholism. And that's why, and that's another topic for another day. But really what we have, I'm an alcoholic, right? But if you think about it, the reason why alcohol was my drug of choice was because I was in professions where really the only legal thing to do was drink alcohol. That's why in police forces, in the military, and other professions, like doctors, nurses, things like that, where people are tested, it's really alcohol is the only thing. When's the last time you saw a pilot in treatment for methamphetamines?
Well, no, but what I was saying is you're saying when alcohol enters the body as a substance,
right,
it's poison every cell in your body.
Right.
But what about these process addictions like prescription drugs that have been manufactured in a lab specifically in order to trigger those parts of the brain? Does that same thing apply when it comes to the person's reasoning to deny at all costs? Well,
yeah, because again, it's addiction. It's addiction that's inherited. Okay, now we're getting into the actual chemical processes with alcohol as opposed to opiates. Actually, opiates and the other drugs are even worse because they're synthetic drugs that are designed in a lab, and they are actually designed to disconnect your thinking.
Oh, okay. So in that case, it is, even though it's not a poison like alcohol, it's still miswiring the brain to think that it needs those drugs to survive.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the thing is, they're much more powerful, to be honest with you. I mean, you have to keep in mind that fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. And all of us, people our age, we when you and I were growing up and we were teenagers and in college, if you knew somebody that was a heroin addict, you're like, oh my God, that is hardcore heroin. That's like, you're at the end of the line. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than that. By the way, the THC in marijuana today is probably quadruple the potency of marijuana when you and I were growing up. So, for those of you out there whose parents and grandparents were at Woodstock in 1969 and you saw them smoking weed, the weed that your kids are smoking today is much more potent than what they were smoking back then. Much more potent. But anyway, that's I don't want to go down a rabbit trail with that. The point is that this is, your brain recognizes it as a survival mechanism. So when you're dealing with your loved one, you have to understand that you're in a battle because that for this person to survive, they're going to have to stop using. You know that. Everybody, it's obvious to everybody around them that if you want to survive, you've got to stop using. The problem is the person's brain is saying, if I stop using, I won't survive. That's the battle you're in. And that's why it's so frustrating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very good. So what do you guys do? Like, you work in a detox unit, right? And they're coming right off the streets, probably not in a very good situation. Otherwise, they would not be in your detox unit. If they're coming to you in denial and the brain is miswiring, and family members, they're at a loss, what does the medical professionals do, or what can you do in order to convince someone to override that denial?
That is, Lily, if I could answer that successfully, I would win the Nobel Peace Prize now, wouldn't I? I think that this is one of the mysteries of humankind, kind of like we're on the search for the cure for cancer. I will tell you, the person that comes up with the definitive answer to what you're talking about will have solved one of the great mysteries of humankind. By the way, alcohol and it being a problem, when we talk about humankind and the history of humankind, it actually goes back. I mean, and I'm not preaching religion here. Don't think I'm getting religious on you here. I'm just going to point out a fact that alcohol and problems with alcohol go back to about chapter 3 in the Bible in Genesis. That's how far back in humankind. And we know that when you're talking Genesis in the Bible, that's probably the earliest known written recording of human history. And alcohol was there. Okay, go look for yourself if you're interested in it. So it's an age-old problem. All we can do is go with what we know works, and that is, let me see how I can construct this here, because I know that the path. Look, I got sober, right? I've been over, at this point, as we're listening to this podcast in 2025, I'm 13 years sober. Okay, so obviously something worked. And I'm unabashedly a 12-step guy. I unabashedly believe that you need to have a metaphysical and spiritual transformation, okay? And everybody that I know that has gotten sober has had a similar experience. Now, that experience, before you think I'm pushing religion on you, to stop there for a minute, I'm saying a spiritual and metaphysical transformation, okay? And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So calm down, those of you that are out there that think that I'm pushing religion down your throat. Okay, I'm not telling you what to believe, but you need to believe in something. But along with that, somehow we have to penetrate your cranium with the idea that you cannot use safely any substance, any mood-altering substance, you cannot use safely. And until you understand that inherently in your soul, you're not going to get 24 hours of sobriety. Now, there are people that are experimenting with different modalities to make that happen. In fact, Bill Wilson, his entire life was on that quest of trying to get people to have an experience, because he had what he called the white light experience in the hospital, like right before he got sober. He had this white, and again, there's a lot of books that are written about this whole experience, and he had this white light experience, and he was convinced that experience is what got him to the point of sobriety. And then he thought, okay, well, that's what other people need to have. So his whole life, he was trying to recreate that. And he did some very controversial things in his life, but he was always on the quest trying to do that. So that's what we're going to have to do. But let me address one of the things that you just mentioned here, Lily, and that is, what about the other drugs? And this is important to understand, that if you are in treatment and you are in recovery for one substance, in my case it's alcohol, but maybe for you it's fentanyl or heroin or methamphetamine or whatever the case may be, you cannot get into sobriety for one substance, but then begin using another substance. I cannot go and safely use fentanyl. Likewise, a fentanyl addict cannot turn around and safely drink. None of us can safely use marijuana. Okay, I don't care what people are telling you. You cannot safely use marijuana if you're an addict. We also have to be careful of getting into the process addictions: eating, sex, gambling, all those other issues. And that's
because there's still a similar effect on the brain? Because
what's transmuted is addiction. Mm-hmm. The problem is, in our society, we tend to stovepipe. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. Those types of things. They really are one and the same, if that makes sense.
So, Mike, you were just reminding me our last episode was, your body doesn't know what time it is. It doesn't know whether it's Christmas or Thanksgiving or Valentine's Day. When it comes into the world of addiction, if the brain is miswiring, it doesn't know. I mean, certainly there are drugs more potent like fentanyl or heroin or alcohol, right? So addiction is addiction. And the way an addictive mind reacts to those different types of substances, whether it's process addictions, gambling, all that stuff, versus an actual substance that you're putting into your body, it seems to be a very similar vein in terms of how the body reacts to all of that. So you made a very good point as I was thinking about the denial piece. It was almost like with some of the readings I've done with Bill Wilson, is he was seeking that out-of-body experience. It's almost like whenever we talk about, if the mind is not functioning well, and we are all, how do you separate yourself from your mind? When I think, and I'm speaking to you right now, I'm thinking from my mind inside out. But if the inside of my brain is not functioning properly, the only way that I can not listen to my brain is to have an out-of-body experience, to say, no matter what I'm thinking, my thinking is actually not correct. So I have to deny myself. So to be in denial is right. You have to actually deny yourself and not listen to yourself because your brain is telling you something. So if I'm in treatment or I'm going to detox and you're telling me all this stuff, my brain is thinking, hell no, I'm not listening to you. But then I have to think, okay, my brain is misfiring. It is saying everything that the world tells me, I'm wrong. But we inherently like to be right about everything. So there has to be something outside of ourselves where, you'll always say, hey, when you're in Al-Anon, you listen to your sponsor. Stop listening to yourself. If you continue to listen to yourself, you're going to you're going to be in this situation that you're in. Your best thinking is what got you here because your best thinking is misfiring. So until that occurs, you're never going to get better, I think.
No, and I'll tell you what, that's a really good way of looking at it, the way that you just put it, that you have to deny yourself because your brain is denying the reality of what's going on. Everybody around you sees what's going on. Everybody. A small child could look at your situation and go, there's something inherently not right. But you're denying it. And that's why in a program of recovery, many programs of recovery will say, for at least the first year, how about you just sit, be quiet, don't say anything, and just follow the suggestions. Just follow the suggestions. Now, you'll find that if you're new to the recovery world, no one's really telling you or making you do anything. Everything is a suggestion. However, but you have to keep in mind that if we went up in an airplane right now and we decided to jump out of that airplane, putting on a parachute is only a suggestion. You don't have to put a parachute on. You can jump out of that airplane. We're just suggesting that you put a parachute on. And that's the way that this is. So the suggestions that you're getting from people that are in recovery, yes, you can do whatever you want to do. But if you're somebody that has been struggling for years and you've lost your job, maybe you've gone to jail, maybe you've gotten your 8th DUI. Yes, we know those people, or people that even have more than that. You're having all these consequences due to your drinking. You might, but now you're talking to somebody that has, let's say, 30 years of sobriety or even a year of sobriety. And when they're giving you a suggestion, it's probably in your best interest to follow what they're doing, because after all, they did something that you didn't, and that is get a year of sobriety, even a month of sobriety. They were able to do something you're not able to do. And so you have to follow that. But some of the things that I hear almost on a daily basis at work, it would be stunning. It would be stunning to you. It would be, I just had a patient recently say to me, well, Mike, I'm hearing you talk, but the professionals here in the hospital tell me that drinking beer is not that bad for me. And so let's just break that down. Now, we're in a detox unit. I'm an addictions counselor, and the person is looking at me with a straight face and saying, the professionals in the building are telling me that drinking beer is not that bad. Now, we're sitting in a detox unit. By the way, this individual has been in our detox facility multiple times.
So which professional is the person?
Well, I know. And I looked at the guy and I said, excuse me. What am I? I'm an addictions counselor. That's what I do. And I think even this individual kind of realized the absurdity of what he just said. And
which further attests that the mind is not functioning
And
well.
I can tell you this, there is no one in this unit told you that the amount of beer that you're drinking is okay. There's no one in this unit that said that to you. But that just shows you the power of the mind and the denial. It shows you.
Well, just like you were saying, there's a misfiring. And so lots of times when you think about survival, right? When you talk about your natural instincts, we are told, listen to yourself, right? In a fight or flight mode, when in terms of your what's the part of the brain that survival piece, right? Listen to your instinct, follow your sixth sense. When there's danger, don't deny it, get out of there. Well, if it's misfiring when it comes to in the addiction world, right? What did I used to say to you all the time? I trust you with your life, with my life, but wow, the only area that you ever lie to me is with your drinking. And it would just frustrate me to no end, right? But because your body was trying to lie to survive, that's it. That's why you did what you did. But for the longest time, I could never figure that out.
Yeah. It's a tough question. And I wish I had the answer as to what, the problem is that in our society today, everybody wants the quick fix. I will say that, and we'll probably do a podcast on this down the road, that, there's people that are looking at the GLP-1s, the Ozempics and the other types of drugs. That's the weight loss drug that's out there. Take a look at that. If you're not familiar with the GLP-1s, it's, supposed to be for diabetes. People that have diabetes will use this medication, but one of the side benefits, if you want to say, is, it's used to suppress appetite, and people are losing weight with this. Now, it comes with a lot of side effects. There's a lot of, yes, you lose weight. In fact, it's highly effective in losing weight, but there's a whole lot of problems that go along with that. Now, it's not the purpose of this podcast today, but I want to say that there are people that are looking at that as beneficial, because if it suppresses appetite, that there are studies now that are showing that it also suppresses cravings for drugs and alcohol. So I can tell you that we're not using that where I work, and I think that there's some trepidation in that, but they are looking at it. Now, the reason why I bring that up is everybody's looking for the quick fix. If I could stop my drinking, what's the magic pill? What's the magic pill to do this? Well, there isn't really a magic pill. There are drugs out there that will help you in suppressing cravings. There are drugs that will help you in sort of like being that nuclear shock. We talked about Ativan. We talked about the opiate uptake inhibitors, the naltrexones, Vivitrols, they help. GABA, Camprol, those types of drugs. But those drugs really help they get your brain chemistry back. It helps assist in getting your brain chemistry back to where it needs to be. And I think that when it comes to recovery, that you have to be careful and just trying to find that quick fix. Yes, we have to deal with the physical part of it, the physical cravings, but to get through that, but really long-term sobriety is not going to be that using a pill, using a drug to make it stop. It really is, at the end of the day, you must have that mental, spiritual, metaphysical transformation that we talked about. Because after all, even the medically assisted treatment that I used it for 1 year. I'm not on any of those things anymore. What keeps me sober today? That metaphysical change. That's what's going to do it. But the problem is that we are so stubborn as human beings. And I will tell you, the patients that I see in my unit that come over and over and over again to our treatment, they just, in their mind, they just will not listen. It's a stubbornness. It really is. It's like the one thing they want to, and many of them will try to find any modality under the sun except for the one that you're presenting to them. It's like, I don't want that one. Any other one. Because I have, patients that come in, hey, Mike, did you hear about this European study? In the Netherlands, they're doing it. I'm like, why do I need to go to the Netherlands? I know it works. They're like, yeah, but hold on. You're on your 40th treatment episode, and we're telling you what works in sobriety. Why are you, obviously you want to get well. Why are you trying to find all these obscure little techniques? By the way, most of the techniques that they're looking at that they want to try involve still using, by the way.
Well, Mike, One thing I know that whether it's AA or Al-Anon is when you talked about that metaphysical with long-term sobriety, long-term recovery is that metaphysical. And so I know that in AA and Al-Anon, they talk about the higher power. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they say, even if it's the group, or it could be that rock or something outside of yourself. Remember we were saying how the brain is malfunctioning? So a person is always looking in, out. So in order to be able to look out in, that could be your sponsor, that could be your group, someone who's bringing some semblance of sanity, who knows in reality what is truly happening. The addict and the alcoholic, their brain is misfiring, not only because they're an addict or they're under the influence, but like you're saying, lots of times they could be malnourished. Right? How is it?
They're all malnourished.
Right. So how is it whenever, like for me, if I'm super hungry, right, and I haven't eaten all day, I'm not thinking straight. Well, this person hasn't been thinking straight for years. And plus they're under the influence of an outside substance, or the brain has been triggered through addiction. So they have to, when you say metaphysical, they have to rely, in order to beat the denial, they have to be willing not to listen to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough.
But they do it every day.
For those who want to get recovered, right? To go into recovery. And so I think that, hey, do I get the Nobel Prize now?
Yeah. And I think that you do have to trust in something bigger than you. By the way, I would take issue with it being the doorknob or a rock.
Yes.
It has to be something that is inherently more powerful than you.
That you can trust.
That you can trust. Because now we are trusting in something that is certainly more powerful than us, but is destructive. And by the way, and we can wrap up on this, that for those of you that are struggling with this idea of a higher power or God, or that there's some deity out there, and if you're struggling with that concept, again, I'm not going to tell you what you want to believe, but I'm going to challenge this notion that you don't believe in a God. You know, if you are listening to this podcast and you're still using, and you've been through treatment many times, and drugs and alcohol have created lots of problems in your life, you have to ask yourself, do my drugs and alcohol, do they command me on what to do? Does it tell me where to go, when to go, who am I going to go with, where am I going to go, if I'm going to go at all, if I'm going to have a family or they will leave, if I'm going to have my dream career or I'm going to lose it, on and on and on. And if the answer to that is yes, meaning have these things or continue using, and you continue to use, my friend, that's a God. That is a God. And you worship faithfully. You're at the altar every day in worshiping. That's a God. So this notion that you don't believe in a God, let's just put that aside right now. And you've put your trust in drugs and alcohol. Why don't you just try putting your trust in something else? Whether it's the group, whether it's a sponsor, whether it's an organization that you belong to, it's something bigger than you. That's one of the things in psychology we have found is every one of us wants to be part of something. We want to be a part of something that matters, something that is bigger than us, this movement. That will look different for each person. For some people, it will be an overtly religious experience. For others, it will be getting plugged into the community. Maybe you want to go help other people. Maybe you want to be a part of a group. Maybe you want to lead that group. Maybe you want to start a group, whatever it may be. But it is something that is bigger than you, that has a positive purpose. But this notion that we don't believe in a God, just do away with that right now, because you do. Because how many times you've ever heard this? The bottle's calling me. I know I should not be drinking, but I do it anyway. The pipe is calling me. The needle is calling me. My friend, that's a God. That's a God, and you worship. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And you must think of it in those terms. You must think of it in those terms. This God is a dark God that wants you to die. And that at the end of addiction, that's what's going to happen. You cannot name one person in history, certainly in your life, where they're cruising along and their life sucked. They're just cruising along and they just have a crappy life and they say, but you know what, I think I'm going to start drinking and drugging. Oh, and then my life got better once I started drinking and drugging. It sucked before then, but now it got better. Name that person. Name that person. There aren't any. And that's what you have to think about. You keep thinking that drugs and alcohol are making your life better or making your problems better. They do not. They make every single problem that you have infinitely worse. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up.
I think this was a very interesting topic. I think we covered a lot of areas that maybe we've talked about before, but hitting it really hard as far as like the denial, why the brain gets suffers through that. And a lot of good ideas, Mike. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you came up with the idea tonight, so thank you for that. So everybody take care. Listen, take this podcast. There's people out there that need to hear this, so spread it far and wide. We do have some interviews coming up that I know that you guys are going to find very, very interesting. Some very interesting people that are going to be coming on to the program, and I know that you're going to get a lot out of it. So you guys take care of yourselves, and we will be talking soon. And again, this is Mike and Lily, and Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily, and Recovery is Possible podcast. We'll see you guys next week. So as I always like to say, I do not represent any group, do not represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what I've done because it's helped me and maybe it will help you too. If I've said something that does not apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well. That's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we hope to impart the knowledge we have gained to others as well. With that, please visit our Facebook page, Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's any topic that you're interested in hearing about. We'd love to hear from you, and take care, and we'll see you next time.